The diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge dropped out of hyperspace above Prime, and Daniel felt his stomach twist in that familiar way it always did after a long jump. He stood at the observation window of the lower deck, watching the alien world grow larger through the reinforced glass. The planet was beautiful in a way that made him uncomfortable. It glowed with soft blues and purples, wrapped in clouds that sparkled like crushed diamonds. Everything about the seemed designed to remind humans just how rough and unpolished they really were. Daniel was 34 years old. He had fought in the Unification Wars back on Earth, survived the Mars Rebellion, and served as security on 6 different diplomatic missions across the galaxy. His hands carried scars from knife fights and plasma burns. His left shoulder ached when the weather changed, a gift from a piece of shrapnel that the medics had never fully removed. He was not a diplomat. He was not charming or educated or graceful. He was simply good at keeping people alive, and that was why Ambassador Laura had requested him for this mission. The ambassador appeared beside him, her reflection ghosting across the window glass. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been negotiating with alien species since before Daniel was born, and she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had talked her way out of more dangerous situations than most soldiers had ever faced. "First time seeing a world?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "It looks expensive." Ambassador laughed softly. "Everything about thee is expensive. Their cities are made of crystal. Their clothes are woven from light. They live for thousands of years and spend most of that time perfecting arts that we cannot even pronounce." She paused and looked at him directly. "They will look down on us, Daniel. They will smile and speak kindly, but in their hearts they see us as children playing with fire. Do not let it bother you." "It will not," Daniel said. He meant it. He had stopped caring what others thought of him a long time ago. The shuttle carried them down through the shimmering atmosphere and landed on a platform of white stone that floated above a city of impossible beauty. Towers of crystal rose into the lavender sky, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of frozen light. Gardens hung suspended in the air, filled with flowers that sang in harmonies too complex for human ears to fully appreciate. Daniel stepped off the shuttle and felt immediately out of place, like a mud-stained boot standing on a silk carpet. A welcoming party waited for them at the end of the platform. They were tall and slender, with silver skin that reflected the light like polished metal. Their eyes were large and luminous, glowing in shades of violet and gold and green. They moved with a grace that made even the simplest gesture look like dancing. Daniel had read the briefing files on the way here. He knew that they were telepathically sensitive, that they could feel emotions the way humans felt temperature, and that they considered physical violence to be the lowest form of communication. He also knew that they had never faced a real war. Their corner of the galaxy had been peaceful for 10,000 years. They had no soldiers, no weapons, no understanding of what it meant to fight for survival. Daniel wondered how they would react if they ever had to. The lead stepped forward and greeted Ambassador with flowing words and graceful hand movements. Daniel did not listen to the translation. His eyes moved across the crowd, scanning for threats out of habit. He noted the exits, the sight lines, the positions of the guards who stood at the edges of the platform with ceremonial staffs that probably did not work as weapons. That was when he saw her. She stood near the back of the welcoming party, younger than the others, with silver skin that seemed brighter somehow and violet eyes that sparkled with something that looked like mischief. She was watching him with open curiosity, her head tilted slightly to one side like a cat, examining a strange new creature that had wandered into her territory. Daniel looked away and returned his attention to the ambassador. The welcoming ceremony continued for what felt like hours, the loved ceremony. They loved ritual and tradition and long speeches filled with words that meant nothing practical. Daniel stood at attention the entire time, his face blank, his hands clasped behind his back. He had learned long ago how to disappear into the background, how to become invisible while remaining perfectly visible. When the ceremony finally ended, the delegation was led through the crystal halls of the palace to their quarters. Daniel walked 3 steps behind Ambassador, his eyes constantly moving. The halls were filled with artwork that probably cost more than his entire lifetime salary. The floors were smooth as glass and reflected their images like still water. Everything was beautiful and cold and perfect. Their quarters were a suite of rooms overlooking the floating gardens. Daniel checked every corner, every window, every possible point of entry before allowing the ambassador to settle in. She watched him work with patient amusement. "You really think someone is going to attack us here?" she asked. "I think that assuming safety is the fastest way to end up dead," Daniel replied. That evening, there was a banquet. The had prepared a feast of foods that glowed and shimmered and tasted like colors Daniel did not have names for. The great hall was filled with hundreds of guests, all of them beautiful, all of them graceful, all of them looking at the human delegation with polite curiosity that barely concealed their sense of superiority. Daniel stood near the entrance watching the crowd. He did not eat, he did not drink, he simply watched. He did not notice the young woman approaching until she was already standing in front of him. "You are the human warrior," she said. Her voice was like music, but there was something sharp beneath the melody. "I am, my mother is High Councilwoman." Daniel inclined his head slightly. "Daniel, security." Smiled, and the smile had teeth in it. Security, such a simple word. "Tell me, Daniel, what are you protecting your ambassador from? The flowers, the music, the terrible danger of good food and pleasant conversation?" Daniel looked at her evenly. "I protect her from everything." Laughed. The sound was bright and cutting. "How wonderfully human. You live such short lives, and yet you spend so much of that time worrying about death." She stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the light dancing in her violet eyes. "Tell me, warrior, do those scars on your hands frighten you? Do you wake in the night thinking about all the ways your fragile body could break?" "No," Daniel said. "No," raised an eyebrow. "Just no, no explanation, no defense of human courage." "You would not understand it," Daniel said simply. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation. She was not used to being dismissed. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a chime sounded through the hall and the guests began moving toward their seats for the formal dinner. Looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she smiled again, and this time the smile was different, less mocking, more curious. "We will speak again, Daniel," she said. "I find you interesting." She turned and walked away, her silver gown flowing behind her like liquid metal. Daniel watched her go. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply filed the encounter away in his mind and returned his attention to scanning the crowd for threats. But somewhere in the back of his thoughts, he found himself wondering why a noblewoman would waste her time talking to a human soldier. He decided it did not matter. He was wrong. The days that followed the banquet were filled with meetings and negotiations that Daniel did not attend. His job was simple. He stood outside doors. He walked 3 steps behind the ambassador. He watched and waited and stayed ready for trouble that he hoped would never come, but made his job considerably more complicated. She appeared on the second morning as Daniel was walking through the eastern corridor toward the ambassador's meeting chamber. She fell into step beside him without invitation, her silver robes whispering against the crystal floor. "Good morning, Daniel," she said brightly. "Did you sleep well? I imagine human beds must feel very strange after spending so much time in those metal boxes you call starships." Daniel did not slow his pace. "I slept fine." "Just fine, not wonderfully, not terribly," matched his stride easily, her long legs covering ground without effort. "Humans are so limited in their descriptions. Everything is fine or okay or not bad. Do you not have words for joy, for comfort, for the simple pleasure of waking in a beautiful place?" "I have words," Daniel said. "I choose not to use them." Laughed. Fascinating. A human who hoards his words like treasure. Tell me, warrior, is that something you learned in your wars, to give nothing away? Daniel glanced at her. She was smiling that sharp smile again, her violet eyes bright with amusement. He could feel her probing at him, testing his defenses, looking for cracks she could widen. Yes, he said. They walked in silence for a few steps. Daniel hoped she would grow bored and leave. She did not. I have been reading about human history, said. It is quite remarkable in a tragic sort of way. So much death, so much destruction. You spent thousands of years killing each other over land and resources and ideas that you later abandoned. And now you have reached the stars, and what do? You build weapons. You train soldiers. You prepare for more killing. We prepare to survive, Daniel said. Survive what? The galaxy has been at peace the great empires have treaties, the trade routes are protected. What exactly are you surviving against? Daniel stopped walking, stopped beside him, her smile faltering slightly at the sudden change. They have been safe for 10,000 years, Daniel said quietly. You have never known hunger, you have never known invasion. You have never watched your cities burn while your children screamed. You look at humans and see violence. We look at the galaxy and see a peace that could end at any moment. He met her eyes directly. We prepare to survive because we know what happens to those who do not. Stared at him. For a moment, the mischief faded from her eyes, replaced by something that might have been understanding. Or perhaps it was just confusion. Daniel did not know how to read expressions, and he did not particularly care to learn. You truly believe that, she said softly. You believe the peace will end. Everything ends, Daniel said. The only question is whether you are ready when it does. He resumed walking. After a moment followed. She returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time she found him, she had new questions. She asked about human families, about human love, about the strange custom of binding yourself to a single partner for an entire lifetime. The do not mate for life, she explained as they walked through the floating gardens. We form connections that last for centuries sometimes, but we do not pretend they are permanent. Nothing is permanent. Why do humans insist on believing otherwise? Because we do not have, Daniel said. He paused beside a flower that hummed with a melody he could not quite follow. A human life is short. 70 years, maybe 80 if you are lucky. We cannot afford to waste that time searching endlessly for something better. When we find love, we hold on to it. Even if the love fades, even if you grow apart. Yes. Shook her head, that seems foolish. It is not about wisdom, Daniel said. It is about loyalty, about choosing someone and staying with that choice even when it is hard. He looked at her. Humans will die for the ones they love, without hesitation, without regret. Can they say the same? Did not answer. She looked away, her fingers brushing against a silver petal. On the 5th day, she found him in the courtyard during the early evening hours. The twin suns of Prime were setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Daniel had found an empty space away from the main buildings, a place where he could train without an audience. He did not hear her approach. She stood in the shadows of a crystal archway and watched as he moved through his forms. Daniel's combat style was nothing like the flowing elegance of martial arts. It was brutal and direct, designed to end fights quickly and decisively. He struck the air with fists and elbows and knees, his movements sharp and economical. There was no beauty in it. There was only efficiency. But as watched, she began to see something else. She saw the pain in his movements, the weight of memory in every strike. He was not just training his body, he was fighting ghosts. She could feel echoes of emotion rolling off him in waves, strong enough to penetrate even her casual telepathic shields. Grief, rage, guilt, loss. This man had seen things that she could not imagine. He had done things that he would never speak about. And every night, he came to this empty courtyard and fought battles that had ended years ago. Felt something shift inside her chest. a strange tightness that she did not recognize. Daniel finished his routine and stood still, his breath heavy in the cooling air. Sweat ran down his forearms. His simple human clothes were dark with moisture. He looked exhausted and somehow more alive than anyone she had ever seen. She stepped out of the shadows. Daniel turned instantly, his body dropping into a fighting stance before his mind had even registered who was there. When he saw, he straightened slowly, his expression blank. "You were watching," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the smooth stone. "You fight like you are angry at the universe." "Sometimes I am." "Who taught you to fight like that?" Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Pain taught me. Loss taught me. The galaxy does not care about grace or beauty. It only cares about who survives." Stopped a few feet away from him. The dying light of the suns caught the silver of her skin and made her glow like a statue come to life. For a moment, she looked impossibly beautiful and impossibly sad. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "When I first saw you at the banquet, I thought you were simple, another human soldier, all muscle and no mind. But you are not simple at all, are you?" "I am exactly what I appear to be," Daniel said. "A man who has seen too much and lived too long." "You are barely middle-aged by human standards." "Some lives are longer than years can measure." Nodded slowly. She understood what he meant, even if she had never experienced it herself. Some burdens age the soul faster than time aged the body. "I will leave you to your training," she said, stepping back. "But I will see you tomorrow, Daniel." "Why?" Daniel asked. Paused. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She thought about it for a moment, her violet eyes searching his face for something she could not name. "Because you interest me," she said finally, "and because I think there is more to you than scars and silence. I want to find out what it is." She turned and walked away, her silver form disappearing into the gathering darkness. Daniel watched her go. He told himself that she was just a bored noblewoman looking for entertainment. He told himself that her interest would fade as soon as she found something more amusing. But when he returned to his quarters that night, he found himself standing at the window for a long time, staring out at the alien stars and thinking about violet eyes that saw more than they should. The attack came on the 7th day, in the quiet hours before dawn. Daniel was already awake when the first explosion shook the palace. He had never been a heavy sleeper. Years of combat had trained his body to rest lightly, always ready to move at the first sign of danger. He was on his feet and reaching for his weapon before the sound had finished echoing through the crystal halls. The second explosion was closer. He heard screaming in the distance and the sharp crack of energy weapons discharging. Daniel moved. He reached Ambassador's quarters in seconds, pounding on the door until she opened it. Her face was pale but calm. She had survived too many crises to panic now. "Get dressed," Daniel said. "We need to move." "What is happening?" "Attack unknown hostiles." Daniel scanned the corridor, his weapon raised. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say." They moved through the palace corridors as more explosions rocked the building. The beautiful crystal walls were cracked and blackened in places. Bodies lay on the floor, guards who had been cut down before they could even draw their ceremonial staffs. Daniel stepped over them without hesitation. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, survival was all that mattered. He led the ambassador to a reinforced room near the center of the palace, a shelter that they had built centuries ago and never expected to use. Other members of the delegation were already there, huddled together in fear. Daniel pushed Ambassador through the door. "Stay here," he said. "Do not open this door for anyone but me." "Where are you going?" Daniel did not answer. He was already moving back into the chaos. The attackers were human. Daniel recognized their gear, their tactics, their brutally efficient movements. They were soldiers, trained and equipped with military-grade weapons. They moved through the palace like wolves through a flock of sheep, killing anyone who crossed their path. Daniel killed 3 of them in the first corridor. He did not hesitate. He did not feel guilt. These were enemies, and enemies were meant to be destroyed. He found a wounded guard who gasped out information before dying. The attackers called themselves the Void Crescent. They were a human faction opposed to alien integration, fanatics who believed that humanity should conquer the galaxy rather than join it. They had come to destroy the peace talks and show the aliens that not all humans were willing to bow. Daniel moved deeper into the palace, following the sounds of combat. He took down more attackers as he went, using his weapon until it ran out of charge, then using his hands. The Void Crescent soldiers were good, but Daniel was better. He had been fighting since before most of them were born. He found in the eastern wing. She was cornered in a gallery of ancient art, surrounded by 4 attackers. Her silver skin was stained with blood that was not her own, and she held a broken piece of crystal like a knife. Her violet eyes were wide with terror, but she stood her ground. She was not going to die cowering. The attackers laughed at her. One of them raised his weapon. Daniel hit them from behind like a storm made flesh. The first attacker died before he knew Daniel was there, his neck snapping with a sound like breaking wood. The second spun and fired, but Daniel was already moving, his body flowing through space with the brutal efficiency of a man who had spent his life learning how to kill. The shot missed. Daniel's counterattack did not. The third attacker was faster. He caught Daniel with a blow to the ribs that would have dropped most men. Daniel absorbed the impact and kept fighting, driving his elbow into the man's throat, feeling the cartilage collapse under the blow. The fourth attacker ran. Daniel did not let him get far. When it was over, Daniel stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by bodies. His chest heaved with exertion. Blood ran down his arms from a dozen wounds, some shallow, some deep. The world tilted slightly as his body began to register the damage it had taken. Stared at him. She had not moved from her corner. The broken crystal was still clutched in her hand, forgotten. "Are you hurt?" Daniel asked. His voice was rough, strained. Shook her head. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Daniel nodded. "Good, stay here, more may be coming." He took one step toward the door and collapsed. The world went sideways. The crystal floor rushed up to meet him. He tried to catch himself, but his arms refused to obey his commands. The wounds were worse than he had thought. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the polished surface like dark water. He heard scream his name. He felt her hands on his face, his chest, pressing against wounds that would not stop bleeding. Her silver skin was stained red now, and there were tears streaming down her face. That seemed wrong. Why was she crying? She barely knew him. She had spent a week teasing him, mocking him, treating him like a curiosity. Why would she cry for a human soldier who was dying on a floor he did not deserve to touch? "Daniel," she was saying. "Daniel, stay with me, please. You cannot die, you cannot." He wanted to tell her that everyone died. He wanted to explain that this was simply his time, that he had always known he would end his life bleeding out in some foreign place far from home. It was the fate of soldiers. It was the price of the life he had chosen. But his mouth would not work. His vision was fading, the beautiful colors of the gallery dissolving into gray. The last thing he heard before darkness took him was voice, screaming for the healers, screaming with a desperation that made no sense to him at all. Then there was nothing. The battle ended an hour later. Reinforcements arrived from the orbital stations, overwhelming the remaining Void Crescent attackers with numbers and technology. The terrorists were captured or killed. The palace was secured. The diplomats were safe. None of that mattered, too. She sat in the medical chamber, watching the healers work on Daniel's broken body. They had stripped away his bloody clothes and connected him to machines that beeped and hummed with unfamiliar rhythms. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his breathing was shallow and weak. The healers spoke in hushed voices. They were not familiar with human physiology. They did not know which organs were essential, which blood vessels could be repaired, which wounds would heal and which would kill. They were doing their best, but their best might not be enough. Had refused to leave. Her mother had come, had tried to lead her away to rest and recover from the trauma. Had refused. Her friends had come, had offered comfort and distraction, had sent them away. She sat beside Daniel's bed and held his hand in both of hers. His fingers were rough and calloused, so different from the smooth perfection of skin. She traced the lines of old wounds and wondered how many times he had come this close to death before. "You will not die," she whispered to him. "I will not allow it. Do you hear me, Daniel? I forbid you to die." He did not respond. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The healers continued their work. Closed her eyes and pressed his hand against her forehead. She had spent a week trying to understand this strange human creature. She had teased him and questioned him and watched him with fascination. She had told herself that her interest was purely academic, a curiosity about a primitive species that had somehow managed to reach the stars. But that was a lie. She understood that now, sitting in this sterile room with his blood still drying on her silver skin. The truth had become clear the moment she saw him fall. The truth had screamed through her mind like a siren when she caught him in her arms. She cared about him, truly, deeply, terrifyingly cared. And she did not know what she would do if he died. 3 days passed, and Daniel did not wake. The healers worked without rest, consulting medical databases from a dozen different worlds, reaching out to human physicians through emergency channels, trying everything they could think of to keep the broken warrior alive. His body fought back with a stubbornness that surprised them. Humans were supposed to be fragile. This one refused to give up. Did not leave his side. She slept in the chair beside his bed, her head resting on the edge of the mattress, her fingers still wrapped around his. She ate only when the healers forced food into her hands, and even then she barely tasted it. Her silver skin had lost some of its shine, dimmed by exhaustion and worry. Her violet eyes were rimmed with shadows. Her friends came and went. They whispered to each other about how strange it was, how inappropriate, how troubling. A daughter of house keeping vigil over a human soldier. It was not done. It was not proper. What would people think? Did not care what people thought. On the second night, her mother came. High Councilwoman was ancient by human standards, though she appeared no older than a woman in her middle years. Her silver skin was darker than her daughter's, weathered by centuries of life and wisdom. Her eyes were the deep purple of twilight, and they saw things that others could not see. She entered the medical chamber quietly and stood at the foot of Daniel's bed, studying the human who had saved her daughter's life. He looked small and broken, wrapped in bandages and connected to machines. He looked nothing like the warriors of legend, the heroes who conquered empires and shaped the fates of worlds. And yet, reached out with her telepathic senses, the gift that all possessed but few truly mastered, she touched the edges of Daniel's unconscious mind and felt the strength that lay beneath the damaged surface. This man had faced death more times than she could count. He had lost friends, lost comrades, lost pieces of himself that would never grow back. And still he continued. Still he fought. Still he protected others, even at the cost of his own survival. She turned her attention to her daughter, was asleep in the chair, her breathing slow and steady. In sleep, her defenses were down and could sense the emotions swirling through her daughter's heart. Fear, hope, confusion, and beneath all of that, something else. Something that made catch her breath. The soul bond. It was ancient, this phenomenon, older than recorded history, older than the civilization itself. Some called it destiny. Others called it the universe's way of connecting two beings across time and space. They had documented thousands of cases but they remained rare and precious. A soul bond could not be forced or fabricated. It simply was. And there it was, glowing faintly between her daughter and this human warrior. Faint because it was new, barely formed, still finding its shape, but unmistakable. Lowered herself into the chair on the opposite side of Daniel's bed. She watched her daughter sleep and felt the weight of what she had discovered settle onto her shoulders. This would change everything. A soul bond between and a human had never been recorded. It would shock the council. It would scandalize society. It would raise questions about the nature of the bond itself, about whether it could truly exist across species. And worse than all of that, it would break her daughter's heart. Humans lived such short lives. 70 years, 80 if fortune smiled. Would have centuries, perhaps, after Daniel was gone. She would carry the weight of his absence for longer than he had ever been alive. Closed her eyes and breathed slowly. She was a councilwoman. She was a leader of her people. She was supposed to think about the greater good, about tradition, about what was proper and expected. But she was also a mother. She opened her eyes and looked at her daughter's sleeping face. She saw the tear tracks that had dried on silver cheeks. She saw the way his fingers gripped Daniel's hand, as if letting go would mean losing him forever. Some things were more important than tradition. Stirred and woke, her eyes found her mother's face, and for a moment she looked like a child again, small and scared and desperately in need of reassurance. "Mother," she whispered, "he will not wake. The healers do not know if he ever will. They say his wounds are too severe. They say humans are not strong enough to survive what he survived." "Humans are stronger than we give them credit for," said gently. "I do not understand what is happening to me." His voice cracked. "I barely know him. We spoke for a week. He answered my questions with single words. He never smiled. He never laughed. He was rude and blunt and refused to be impressed by anything I said or did." She looked down at Daniel's pale face. "So why does it feel like I am dying along with him?" Rose from her chair and walked around the bed. She knelt beside her daughter and took his face in her hands, tilting it gently until their eyes met. "Because something has happened that neither of you chose," said. "Something old and powerful and beyond our understanding." "What do you mean?" Hesitated. Then she decided that her daughter deserved the truth. "When I touched his mind just now, I felt something, a connection between the two of you. We call it the soul bond. It is rare, it is precious, and it cannot be." His eyes widened. "The soul bond, but that is impossible. He is human. They do not have souls like ours. They cannot form bonds." "And yet it exists. I felt it myself," stroked her daughter's cheek. "I do not know how it happened. I do not know why the universe chose to connect you to this man, but it has, and you must decide what to do with that truth." "What can I do? He may die. Even if he lives, he will grow old and leave me. I will watch him wither and fade, and then I will spend centuries alone, carrying the memory of what we had." "Yes," said simply, "that is the price of love." Stared at her mother. Tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving silver trails on silver skin. "Is it worth it?" she asked. "Is a few decades of happiness worth centuries of grief?" Was silent for a long moment. She thought about her own life, her own loves, her own losses. She thought about the she had lost 300 years ago, and how the pain of that loss still echoed through her heart. "I cannot answer that for you," she said finally. "But I can tell you this. The bond exists whether you accept it or not. You can fight it. You can deny it. You can send him away when he wakes and spend the rest of your life pretending you feel nothing. Or you can embrace it. You can love him for whatever time you have together, and you can carry that love with you through all the years that follow." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. "Do not fight it, my child," she whispered. "He is meant for you." Then she rose and left the chamber, leaving alone with the unconscious human and the weight of everything she had learned. Sat in silence for a long time. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Daniel's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Outside the window, the twin sons of Prime began their slow ascent into the lavender sky. She thought about everything her mother had said. She thought about the soul bond, about destiny, about the cruelty of a universe that would connect her to someone she could not keep. And then she thought about Daniel, about his quiet strength and his sad eyes and the way he had thrown himself into a fight he could not win, just to save her life. He had almost died for her, a woman he barely knew, a woman who had spent a week mocking him and testing him and treating him like a puzzle to be solved. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his hand. "I understand now," she whispered. "I understand what you meant when you said humans will die for the ones they love." She closed her eyes. "Please wake up, Daniel. Please let me tell you that I was wrong. Please let me show you that I can be worthy of what you gave." She stayed there, bent over his hand, until exhaustion pulled her back into sleep. And somewhere in the darkness of his unconscious mind, Daniel heard her voice and began the long climb back toward the light. Daniel woke on the fourth morning. The first thing he saw was light, soft, golden light filtering through crystal walls and painting patterns on the ceiling above him. The second thing he saw was she was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her silver body curled into an uncomfortable position that she had clearly held for too long. Her hand was still wrapped around his, her fingers intertwined with his own. Her face was peaceful in sleep, but he could see the traces of exhaustion in the shadows beneath her eyes and the slight dimness of her silver skin. Daniel did not move. He lay still and watched her breathe, trying to understand what had happened and how he had come to be here. The memories returned slowly. The attack, the fighting, the gallery where he had found her surrounded by enemies, the battle that had followed and the collapse that had ended it. He had been certain he was dying. He had felt the cold creeping through his veins, the darkness closing in around him. But he was alive. He looked down at his body. Bandages covered his chest and arms. Medical devices were attached to his skin, monitoring his vital signs. He could feel the dull ache of wounds that were healing but not yet healed. He should be dead. He knew that with the certainty of a man who had seen death too many times to mistake its approach. Whatever the healers had done, it was nothing short of miraculous. Stirred, her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked confused, caught between sleep and waking. Then she saw that Daniel was looking at her, and everything changed. "Daniel," her voice was barely a whisper, "you are awake." "Yes." "The healers said you might never wake. They said your wounds were too severe. They said humans could not survive what you survived." "They were wrong." Laughed. The sound was wet and broken, half joy and half tears. She pressed her free hand against her mouth and shook her head. "4 days," she said. "I sat here for 4 days, watching you breathe, praying to gods I do not believe in that you would open your eyes. And now you are awake and all you can say is they were wrong." Daniel was silent. He did not know what she expected him to say. He did not know why she had stayed. Seemed to read the question in his eyes. She lowered her hand and looked at him directly. "I was wrong about you," she said. "About humans, about everything. I thought you were simple. I thought you were fragile. I thought you were a curiosity, something to study and tease and forget." She took a shaky breath. "But you are not simple. You are not fragile. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I almost lost you before I understood what that meant." "You barely know me," Daniel said. "I know enough." Leaned forward, her violet eyes bright with emotion. "I know that you saw danger and ran toward it instead of away. I know that you fought impossible odds to save someone who had given you nothing but mockery. I know that you were willing to die for me, Daniel, and that is more than anyone has ever done." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He thought about all the reasons this was impossible. He was human. She would live he would be lucky to see another 40 years. She was nobility. He was nothing. Everything about this was wrong. And yet, "I noticed you," he said quietly. "That first night at the banquet, you walked toward me, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I did not show it because I did not believe someone like you would ever look twice at someone like me." His breath caught, and now I do not know what to believe. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers were cool and smooth against his rough skin. He did not pull away. "My mother told me something last night," said. "She told me that there is a bond between us, something old and powerful and beyond our understanding. She said it cannot be." "A bond?" "The soul bond. It connects two beings across time and space. It is rare and precious, and it has never been recorded between and a human." She paused. "She told me not to fight it. She said you are meant for me." Daniel absorbed this information slowly. He did not understand mysticism. He did not believe in destiny or fate or predetermined connections. He believed in choices and consequences and the harsh reality of a universe that did not care about individual happiness. But he also believed in what he felt when he looked at the pull that had been there from the first moment he saw her, the ache that had grown stronger every time she sought him out, the desperate need to protect her that had driven him into that gallery even though he knew it might kill him. "I do not know if I believe in soul bonds," he said, "but I know that when I saw you surrounded by enemies, I did not think. I did not calculate the odds or consider the risks. I simply moved, because the thought of you being hurt was worse than the thought of dying." Smiled through her tears. "That sounds like something more than simple duty." "It is." She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They stayed that way for a long moment, breathing the same air, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "I do not know," admitted. "You will heal. The diplomatic talks will continue. Eventually your ship will leave and you will return to human space." She pulled back and looked at him. "Unless you choose to stay." "Stay here." "My mother is the High Councilwoman. She has the authority to offer you a position, Guardian of House. It is a title that has never been given to an outsider." Hesitated. "She has already told me she intends to offer it. She believes you have earned it." Daniel was silent. He thought about everything he would be leaving behind. His career, his people, the life he had built over 34 years of struggle and survival. And then he thought about her sharp smile and her curious eyes and the way she had stayed by his side for 4 days, waiting for him to wake. "Will you be there?" he asked, "if I stay?" Nodded. "Always." "Then I will stay." 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in the great hall of the Crystal Palace, fully healed and dressed in the formal robes of a guardian. The wounds had closed. The strength had returned. He looked almost like himself again, except for the new scars that joined the old. High Councilwoman stood before him, her ancient eyes filled with something that might have been approval. The hall was full of witnesses, nobles and human diplomats and representatives from a dozen other species. Ambassador stood near the front, a small smile on her face. "Daniel," said, her voice carrying through the hall, "you have proven your worth through action and sacrifice. You have protected those who could not protect themselves. You have shown that courage is not measured in years but in choices." She extended her hand. In her palm lay a medallion of crystal and silver, the symbol of house. "I offer you the title of Guardian, a place in my house, a home among our people. Do you accept?" Daniel looked at the medallion. Then he looked at who stood at her mother's side, her violet eyes shining with hope. "I accept," he said. The hall erupted in applause, placed the medallion around his neck and stepped forward to embrace him. Her arms wrapped around him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel felt like he belonged somewhere. Later that day, they walked together through the floating gardens. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The flowers sang their complex harmonies, and the air smelled of light and growing things. Slipped her hand into his. "You know this will not be easy," she said. "Our people will talk, they will question, they will say that a human does not belong among them. I know. And you will grow old while I stay young. You will leave me someday, and I will have to continue without you. I know." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "How can you accept that so calmly?" Daniel looked at her, at this impossible, beautiful creature who had somehow chosen him. "Because the alternative is worse," he said. "The alternative is walking away from you right now, spending whatever years I have left wondering what might have been, dying alone with nothing but regrets for company." He reached up and touched her face. "I would rather have 50 years with you than 500 without." His eyes filled with tears. She stepped into his arms and pressed her face against his chest. "I will make them count," she whispered. "Every single day, I will make them worth remembering." "I know you will." Behind them, on the balcony of the palace, watched them standing together in the fading light. She knew the challenges that lay ahead. She knew the pain that would come when his brief human life finally ended. She knew that her daughter was choosing a path that would bring both great joy and great sorrow. But she also knew that some things were worth the cost. Some bonds were worth the grief that followed them. She whispered a blessing into the evening wind and turned away, leaving them to their moment. In the garden below, Daniel held close and watched the sun sink toward the horizon. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know how long they would have together. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was exactly where he was meant to be. And for the first time in his life, that was enough.